Hi there. My name is Lucas Weiss, and I am the host of the Weesesports Quarantine Chronicles. For today's episode, I'm being joined by Dave Feschuk. Dave is a sports columnist at the Toronto Star. In this episode, I chat with Dave about how he got into sports media, the challenges of being a columnist in 2020, as well as his process reporting on the Toronto Raptors winning their inaugural NBA championship. If you've been enjoying the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles content, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel at the bottom right hand of your screen, as well as like, rate, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This is episode 17 of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. All right, for today's episode of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles, I am joined by Dave Feschuk. He is a sports columnist at the Toronto Star. Dave, welcome to the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me, Lucas. Happy to be here. Doing well, thanks.
And thanks so much for being here. And Dave, I want to start by just asking you what it's like to be a sports columnist without any sports to talk about, live sports at least to talk about.
Lucas, it's a very personal and hurtful question. You really hit me where it hurts right off the start here. Tough question. No, it's not fun, Lucas, as you may have noticed. It's the industry, like many industries, like almost every industry, outside the profiteers who've somehow gained off this thing. And I guess some of them aren't profiteers. I shouldn't judge, but the industry's in a tough spot, and nobody's crying for us, and I'm not crying for myself, but life has been thrown into disarray, to say the least, and we're making the best of it. You know, the sports departments across North America, and I'm sure across the world, I really pay attention to the North American sports media more than I pay attention to our colleagues in Europe or the rest of the planet. But the industry has been thrown into turmoil. As you probably understand, as a young lad starting out in this business, and you're at Centennial College, and you're hearing the dire warnings of how crazy you are to get into this business, right? And you're probably crazier now because it's never been tougher to make it in this business, and we'll see how it all shakes out when and if we ever get back to normal. But I'm not sure normal is going to be coming anytime soon.
Well, I certainly agree. And to me, the way in which we are consuming content and media is changing right before our very eyes amidst this pandemic. Like these sorts of Zoom calls right now that you and I are having are becoming more prevalent. I know at the Star, the place that you work, your colleague Bruce Arthur, normally a sports columnist journalist, is now a coronavirus reporter and journalist. So it's interesting to see how a lot of these newspapers are shifting resources, moving normally sports journalists to now, reporting about hard news and the coronavirus, which obviously demands a lot of our attention.
Yeah. Bruce is doing an outstanding job as our coronavirus columnist. He's built for this type of thing. He's a Twitter head. He's constantly engaged in the minute-to-minute, second-to-second developments in so many different things, and the coronavirus has been, right in his wheelhouse. So, we're grateful that he's done that for the newspaper, and I'm sure, he's looking forward to getting back to worrying about things like, will the Maple Leafs actually win a playoff series for the first time since 2004?
Well, I want to get into that later on, because I think, if sports were going on right now, like you'd either be probably covering the Raptors or the Leafs if they were to win a first-round series, which is still so up in the air, and Leaf fans are hoping for that day to come eventually. But I want to shift gears to talk about, your sports career and how you got into the business. And when doing research, I noticed that your brother Scott was very involved as a journalist and now as a speechwriter. I'm just curious how much of an influence he had in shaping your sports journalism career.
Oh, an incredible influence. Yeah, I would say he's probably the main reason I'm in this business, and I'm grateful every day, because it's been a great life, and it continues to be. a great life and a dream job. But yeah, my brother, far more talented than I and far more successful than I. He was a few years older than I was. We both went to Western. And he was when I first rolled into Western as a young frosh, he was the editor-in-chief of the school paper there, the Gazette. And that was around the time that he and some of his colleagues at the Gazette turned that school paper, humble print paper, all little Macintosh computers that are probably about as powerful as something like an iPod. The early days of computing, let's say, Lucas. They turned that newspaper into a 4 times weekly publication. 4 times a week we had to put out a paper. I started writing, really bad sports pieces for it. But I got hooked on the idea of hanging around that place and learning on the job how to do it, learning how to take photographs and learning how to write headlines and learning how to lay out a page and assign a story. And I became one of the sports editors there eventually, and had incredible mentors, not just my brother, who was a great mentor, but Elliot Friedman from Hockey Night in Canada was the sports editor at one point, and Gary Davies, who's now a successful entrepreneur out in Calgary, Paul Vieira, who's worked in multiple media outlets in Ottawa. He was there. My sister-in-law, Sue Allen, who's been my brother's wife, obviously, and incredibly successful journalist in her own right. There were just incredible people there. I was just lucky to be able to sort of hang around there and learn from those guys. And so they sort of dragged me along and got me where I am.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to mention, because Western has produced a lot of, talented sports journalists, reporters in this industry. You mentioned Elliot Friedman, Dan Schulman went through Western, Stephen Brunt did as well, who are both giants in this industry. And, you just mentioned how, you got a lot of chances to practice your craft, and how important were those reps at such a young age to be able to write headlines, take photographs, find your writing voice in shaping the writer that you would become down the road.
Yeah, I think they're still important to this day. I mean, I think you need to continue to get reps. It's one of those businesses where maybe I'm sure there are writers that I know who are super talented and maybe didn't need to practice, could do it right out of the box. I suspect maybe guys like Brunt maybe comes to mind. He seems like he's been able to write since birth. Yeah, he came, speaking of guys who mentored people, he showed up. He's a little bit older than Friedman and I and my brother, but he came to the Gazette in that era and spoke to us. I remember vividly a little talk he gave to us, largely trying to dissuade us, I think, from becoming journalists. Basically what I would do to you, Lucas, unless you really, really are desperate and you have nothing else in your life, do not get into this business, because it's a road to ruin, clearly. But no, Brunt did. He was trying to get across the point that if unless it comes easily to you, it's very difficult. And I still went ahead. It didn't come particularly easy to me, but I kept practicing. And once in a while, you like to think you write a decent one, but I think the guys that are good, I've learned over the years, are pretty critical of their own work, and you never get too comfortable. You're always trying to improve, or else, like Tiger Woods always used to say, if you're not getting better, you're getting worse.
Mm-hmm. And as a sports columnist, I think the columnists that I've read over the years and still continue to read, the best ones are always able to spurn some debate and get people, talking and arguing and debating with each other. Did you always have a knack for being that sort of writer, like very opinionated, wanting to address certain issues and get people talking and debating?
Maybe, yeah, probably. I think I'm a bit of a contrarian by nature. I like to stir up a debate among my friends, and it's really, it stems from just hanging around the Gazette offices or around various watering holes around Western, and probably before that. I mean, I think I grew up in a house where my dad was a big sports fan. He would have, I remember, he would run these hockey pools, again, pre-digital, where you actually had to assemble in a room together the number of people in the pool, and they would draft their teams and have those arguments about sports and about hockey, and specifically in that instance. And I just grew up around people who liked to argue about sports. I remember was a big high school basketball player, and we used to draft teams, NBA teams. Again, not with phones and not with digital means, but just make these fantasy teams up. Who could draft the better team just off the top of their head? That type of thing. So yeah, argument is the essence of sports in a lot of ways for a lot of people. Maybe less so in Canada. I find Canadians are a little less argumentative, but certainly in the States, the debate culture in sports is huge, and so it's always been a big part of what drew me to sports. But so I think there is something to that.
And Dave, how do you transition from your days at Western and the Gazette to then getting hired by the Toronto Star?
Yeah, pure luck, Lucas. Pure luck. You're going to need some in this business. You may find luck and timing are everything. I just got lucky. I was actually working as a summer intern at the Standard, which is the daily newspaper in my hometown, Athens, Ontario. And working at the Standard, I got really lucky there because I was able to, at that time, cover the single A farm team of the Toronto Blue Jays occasionally, the St. Catharines Blue Jays. Back in those days, we get to go to a few of those games. I wasn't the beat writer, but I got to go to those games. I got a lot of great opportunities in my first summer as a sports writer. And then I had a choice. I think I was done 3 years at Western. I was going to go back for a fourth year at Western. And right around August, they offered me a job and said, you could be a full-time sports writer if you so choose. And so I came out early to go pro, Lucas. I wasn't graduated from Western, but I came out early to become a full-time sports writer. It was a dream job, and I still can't believe I got that lucky to get a job like that. And it was in an era where daily newspapers of the size of the Standard had pretty large staffs. We had 4 or 5 sports writers on staff, and those guys were great to me. The guys at the Standard were incredible to me and treated me really well. And I worked there for a few years, and then in '98, I guess it was like 5 years later, after I did take a little hiatus to go on a bit of a backpacking trip around Europe, but somewhere along the way, the timeline skews or it gets blurry for me. But somewhere along the way, I was able to land a gig at the National Post when it was starting in 1998. Again, incredible sports staff there that was really great to work with. The likes of Cam Cole, Roy McGregor, Bruce Arthur came on later. Chris Jones, the incredible magazine writer, and now I guess TV and movie writer. Incredible talent that was assembled there, and again, great to rub shoulders with those guys and bat it around. And then I moved over to the Star, I guess, in 2003. So long story short, a lot of lucky breaks, and still to this day lucky to have a gig in a business where not everybody is so lucky.
Well, I wouldn't complain if I were you, Dave. You're like a college basketball player going pro, and anyone would want that opportunity like yourself. And I want to sort of talk about some of the changes that have obviously occurred. And you started the Toronto Star in 2003, and the Leafs make the playoffs in 2004. And I'm just curious, from a numbers perspective, how many sports writers would have gone to, let's say, cover the Leafs playing the Ottawa Senators in that first round playoffs, or the Philadelphia Flyers in that second round playoff series, and contrast that to, let's say, 2017, 2018, when the Leafs are playing the Capitals and the Bruins in the first round?
Yeah, let's just say a lot more in 2004 than in 2017. Yeah, the travel budgets have definitely been slashed. But I do think the playoffs, it's funny you say that, Lucas, because the playoffs is the one exception where, have invested. I know the Raptors run to the finals. We had the Toronto Star had 3 writers on the road in San Francisco, Oakland for the finals, and in Milwaukee for that Eastern Conference final. Both Bruce Arthur, Doug Smith, and I all went. So there has been incredible investment, when teams have made it worth our while. But the regular season budgets have been slashed across the board. I think that's definitely been a trend, and yeah, for sure, that's been a difficult aspect in terms of providing the type of content that you ideally want to provide.
And Dave, how has being a sports columnist changed since you started, let's say with the Star in 03 until now? Because certainly the invention and the rise of social media, given that your article can go out to a lot of different people, it gives more of these people a voice to, debate, which could be a good thing, but could also instantly criticize you for a piece that comes out.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, the one thing about this business, Lucas, is I learned early on, you have to have a fairly thick skin. If you're going to write things that are, going to rile people up, and even if you're not trying to write things that are going to rile people up, they often do. There's a lot of unintended riling that goes on these days because people are sensitive and people want to argue everything. To be honest, it hasn't affected me all that much. I don't engage in a lot of the back and forth on social media that maybe some of my colleagues do. I just don't see a lot of upside in that. That's just my personal feeling. But I think it's important to write what you believe is correct, write what you think is right, and let the chips fall where they may. But I actually think that the dialogue online is good for everybody, and it adds to the tone, and sometimes in a bad way, sometimes in a good way. But I think ultimately it can be fun. I take it with a grain of salt. I take it with some tongue in cheek, right? We're talking about sports here. We're not talking when Bruce Arthur goes and writes about the coronavirus, that's life and death. And sports can be life and death. Don't get me wrong. I certainly, over this coronavirus period, have written some columns that are a little more serious in nature, that are, about death. And certainly you don't take those with your tongue in cheek. You take those very seriously. But when you're just talking about, are the Leafs any good? That's not exactly sort of the stuff of serious journalism, even if you're trying to be a serious journalist as you execute that stuff. I mean, you have to take it seriously, but you also have to take it as what it is, which is a game, and which is something that's not going to affect the way the world turns.
And in addition to being a sports columnist, you got the chance to write a few books with Michael Grange, who's a writer at Sportsnet right now. You guys wrote one on the Leafs as well as one on Steve Nash. And I'm curious what that process is like to collaborate with another author in writing a book, because oftentimes sports writers like to have their own book and they write it themselves. But I'm just curious about the process of two people working on a book project.
Yeah, well, in those two cases, it was a great experience for me. Michael Grange is a great friend and great colleague and an excellent writer. I think both of us in both those instances, we didn't take any real time off from our jobs to write those books. We did them as passion projects on the side of working as full-time writers. So it helped to have a partner. It helped. It took the edge off. It took the burden off to have a partner and to be able to bat things around back and forth and pass chapters back and forth. And I think it was really a lot of fun. It really was. But to get to the larger point, writing books it's difficult. Even if you're writing relatively modestly length sports books, it's a commitment that requires a ton of time, way more than you ever imagined it will require. Even if you think the subject back and forth, upside down, like we knew the history of the Leafs and and we knew Steve Nash, there's just a lot of legwork that goes into it. And so it was great to have a partner in both those instances. And I was grateful that Michael Grange was such a great partner.
And with writing that Steve Nash book, because, obviously with the Raptors winning the NBA championship, there's been an explosion of basketball popularity throughout this country. But next to someone, let's say, like Dr. James Naismith, who was so, instrumental in inventing basketball, would you say that Steve Nash is the most important figure in the Canadian basketball realm?
Yes, for sure. In terms of Canadians, no doubt about it. I mean, Nash is a revolutionary. Nash is a big reason when you look at that Mike D'Antoni coach Phoenix Suns team, the 7 seconds or less era. They never got over the hump. They never got a title. They came damn close a couple of times. But you can argue that they're in many ways the forefathers of today's game, right? In terms of the high-paced game that we see, that we've seen Golden State perfect and dominate with. Phoenix is a big influence on that. There's no doubt about it. And Nash is such an outlier and such an inspiration to be able to do what he did. Nash is the end of excuses for Canadians, right? I think there was a time in this country, and I'm old enough to remember it, when aspiring young players in basketball had in some ways a bit of a defeatist attitude. There was this feeling that you couldn't make it out of Canada. There was a feeling that if you weren't a 7-footer a la Bill Wennington or Mike Smrek, they weren't going to find you. You wouldn't get chances in the NCAA or the NBA. And the fact that Nash really was only recruited by one school, there's some truth to that. It was very difficult to be found in those days, even if you were an incredible talent like Nash undoubtedly was as a high schooler. But Nash, and of course the advent of the internet and many other factors, but Nash, I think, ended the idea that you can't make it from here. Ended the idea that we couldn't be good enough, and we've seen the gold rush of players that have come since.
Well, for sure, and 7 Canadians drafted in the 2019 NBA draft. We have an Olympic qualifying tournament happening in Victoria next year. So, a lot of things to be excited about Canadian basketball. And for you, Dave, I mean, we talked about earlier how you got the chance to cover the Raptors win an NBA championship, throughout that magical postseason run. It was 1 year ago, very soon ago, that it was the shot of Kawhi Leonard. Soon it will be 1 year since they won the championship. And I'm curious, you as a columnist, when you're writing those pieces about the Raptors and their run, is there more of a gravity of the pieces and the words that you put to the page, given that there are more eyeballs looking at this content and it's such a historical moment, not just for Toronto, but the country as a whole?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for sure. You feel that gravity for sure, Lucas. You also feel incredible pressure because the thing about playoff games that often come down to the last second, a la the Kawhi shot, when you're in our business, in the newspaper business, where we have a print product still going out there en masse, you end up having to write essentially 2 separate columns for a lot of those games. You have to write a column for one outcome, Raptors win. You have to write another column by the end of the game that you can file at the buzzer, Raptors lose. And so you really are engrossed in the writing of a lot of words in a very short amount of time throughout those games, and also before those games, because you do have to prepare those columns in advance if you want them to be any good. And I've certainly learned that from guys that came before me, people like Dave Perkins and Bruce. Somebody I've learned a lot from. Bruce is an incredible deadline writer. I've often tried to reverse engineer how he makes his columns work so well, given that I know he's done the same thing I've done and had to write with 2 different outcomes in mind, which would of course lead you to 2 different tones and 2 different themes. And it's a bit, to be honest with you, those are very stressful moments, but they're really fun moments when you actually feel like you did a decent job. You're never going to do what you feel is a perfect job, but because there's just too much to write in too short a time. But when you feel you did a decent job on one of those nights, it feels great. And there's an adrenaline rush that's hard to sort of replace with anything else, at least in my life. We don't get to go out there and perform in front of 20,000 people, but we certainly get to write with the noise of 20,000 people ringing in our ears, which is a rush of, it's in its own right, a writerly rush anyways. And so it's fun, Lucas, and I highly recommend it. Again, I feel privileged to get that chance to be able to write those columns. And the older I get, the more I do it, the more I cherish it, to be honest with you, and the more I respect, the job and the idea that you got to, really put everything you have into it in that moment.
Was there a moment or a column during that run that stood out to you?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I don't, to be honest with you, I don't remember.
Yeah, no, I feel that.
I don't go back very often to read my stuff. And I really don't remember any particular moment. I mean, I think the Offday, you remember the Offday columns a little better sometimes because you're sort of, those ones you're sort of being a little more creative. You got three guys writing on the team. You've all sort of got to carve out a little space for yourself and say, you write this, I'll write this. Doug's going to write this. Bruce is going to write this. I'll write this. So you try, those ones are sort of fun to sort of brainstorm a different angle on any given day. I mean, there's the ones you regret. I mean, you can look really dumb in hindsight. I remember when they were down 2-0 to Milwaukee, I said they lacked an identity, and Milwaukee had a very clear identity. And, what's going on here? And, of course, it turned out that Nick Nurse exploited the fact that Milwaukee's identity was so predictable, right? Mm. And the fact that Nick Nurse was able to exploit Milwaukee's kind of habitual sameness, and the fact that Mike Budenholzer really didn't adjust the game, just kept playing his game the same way, play after play, sequence after sequence. Nick Nurse took him to school because he was so locked into an identity of what this team is and how we play basketball. So I think Nick Nurse probably gets a chuckle out of that one. I know Masai Ujiri gave me a pretty good jab in the chest after they won the title, saying, "Hey, how's that for an identity, Feschuk?" And I had to give him that. That was worth a few laughs.
No, for sure. And Nick Nurse is just someone that I remember just being so willing to innovate and do anything, to win. And evidence with that, the box and one defense in the NBA Finals on Steph Curry. But Dave, I want to end things off with a question, because obviously right now sports are in hiatus, but eventually they'll come back. But I don't know if you agree with this, but I think it's going to be a new normal, especially if there's no fans initially and the way that sports is covered. And I know you alluded to this in a tongue-in-cheek way earlier about advice for young journalists getting into the business, because it's obviously such a difficult time. But do you think that there are opportunities now compared to, let's say, when you started, to find new ways, innovative ways to produce sports content that is engaging, that brings people together, and that can allow someone to get into the business, but in a completely different way?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. You look at the bar down guys over at TSN, Dave Crixt, Cabby's old running mate, Dave Crixt, started that thing up how many years ago, and look at the success they've had doing sports content in that way, a totally different way, those, and I think the imagination is a powerful tool. And if you can brainstorm a way to do it, for sure, there's always a way. I do think that's the thing about sports content and sports writing, sports broadcasting, anything in the sports business, is the people that succeed are the people that just have that drive to find a way, right? I think guys like Elliot Friedman, he came out of Western at a time when there weren't a lot of jobs in the business. But, I would have bet my, good money on Elliot Friedman succeeding, because I knew he had an incredible work ethic and incredible willingness to do anything, right? Not, he didn't just say, I'm going to be, the lead insider at Hockey Night in Canada or else. He said, you know what, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll take crappy shifts at the Fan 590. I'll do the university sports show at the Fan 590. I'll do basketball. I'll do anything. I'll never locked himself into one path. And that's a great example of I think the one thing I find when I've spoken to young journalism school students or sports journalism students is a lot of people have sort of this idea that there's one path they want to take. Like, I want to go and be this. That's fine. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm just saying the people that I know that have succeeded in the business have often had to do, A, B, C, D, E, F, G before they got to their ultimate goal. And so I think anybody that's willing to sort of be flexible and be innovative and also be very patient, because it's not going to be easy. And also be poor. Because this is not a road to riches, Lucas. I don't know if anybody's told you this.
No, for sure. It's certainly a marathon and not a sprint. And it's all about the journey, I feel like. But again, that point about drive and willing to do what it takes, I think someone like an Elliot Friedman or yourself, I just think it's, that willingness to do what it takes to get there and just have that hard work, determination, and a little bit of luck, which definitely was the case for you.
Yeah, I'm Mr. Luck. It's all Friedman's got real talent and work ethic. I just got lucky.
Dave Feschuk, he is a sports columnist at the Toronto Star. Dave, thank you so much for joining the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles.
Lucas, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. I enjoyed it.